lawyer was involved in that. Sirhan's lawyer was defending Roselli, and the lawyer was in possession of like a grand jury transcript he wasn't supposed to have, and then they were going to prosecute him. And the theory is that he threw the case against Sirhan in return for them not prosecuting him for having this transcript in the Roselli Friars Club case, which is really interesting. But anyway, so what happened to these guys that were implicated in the CIA mafia plots to kill Castro and the associated apparent plot that was successful to kill Kennedy? Well, it was all being reinvestigated in the 70s with the Church Committee, which was investigating CIA wrongdoing. You also had the Rockefeller and the Pike Committee, but put them aside. After the Church Committee, you had the Schweiker-Hart Subcommittee, which looked into the shortcomings of the Warren Commission and how there was a cover-up by both the CIA and the FBI. So that was all falling apart. And then that was followed by the House Assassination Committee, which ruled that there probably was a conspiracy. So this was going all on in the mid-'70s, and Giancana testified before Giancana was going to testify before the Church Committee, but he was shot in his basement while making sausages and making a late-night snack.
I heard there was a militant vegan hit.
What?
I heard there was a militant vegan hit, no?
And then a year later, I should say that one of the things Roselli said was that these Cubans who turned around and then killed Kennedy, they were recruited from the pool of Cubans that Trafficante knew in Cuba. So right there, Trafficante had good reason to want Roselli dead and to be fully resolved that he was talking out of school and something need to be done about it. And I think the rest of the underworld was starting to go along with that view, because the one book I was looking at recently was really, which is called Godson, Willie Fapiano and John Harney. Now, he apparently knew Lansky and Roselli pretty well. And Roselli basically told the same story to this guy, and it seemed, from what this guy surmised, that he was getting it from Giancana. But anyway, the point is made in this book that the other guys in the underworld were very suspicious of Roselli and the fact that Roselli had a loose mouth. And they warned this Fapiano, just don't trust this guy too much. Be careful what you say around him. He's not the type of guy you can trust. And he heard that from Lansky, and he heard that from a couple of other high-up organized crime figures that he was in contact with. So Roselli apparently was not a guy that he was used to a great extent, but was not fully trusted, and for good reason, we know now. So anyway, Roselli himself, the following year, August 1976, he's still apparently on speaking terms, or he's still associating with Santo Trafficante.
Wait, can I throw something in there? Because it seems that it talks about it in 75, after Giancana got murdered, right?
Right. Yes.
That Roselli left Los Angeles and Vegas for Miami, Florida. Now that way, and just like you're saying, if the organized crime guys were questioning him, he would seek safety amongst CIA anti-Castro Cubans in the Florida community, which would be logical that he went to them for safety, to protection. Possibly
it's their territory, but it's also Trafficante's territory.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So he can be trying to assure Trafficante that he's still loyal. He's not going to implicate him any more than it's already gotten out, which was getting out anyway. I mean, Roselli was not the only source for this information. I mean, the Church Committee corroborated it through the CIA itself. I mean, they basically couldn't deny it. So anyway, he was still associated. So Roselli was still associating with Trafficante in 1976, and he met with him for dinner. And then a couple of days later, he had a golf outing, and he never came back. And then a couple of weeks later, his body was discovered in Dumbfoundling Bay, South Florida, stuffed into an oil drum. And one account says that he was found with his testicles and penis stuffed into his mouth, which happens in certain organized crime hits, but it suggests that the person was sleeping with somebody that he shouldn't have. That kind of offense. And even though Roselli was a hell of a ladies' man, no one ever suggested that he was sleeping with somebody he shouldn't have that I know of. So if that detail is true, it's a little curious. Now, have you had Gene Carmen's son on your show?
I don't think so. Who is Gene Carmen's son?
Gene Carmen was supposedly a good friend of Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, I tried to get them, yeah.
And he tells this story with a lot of detail about learning from his mother, that his mother had learned from Roselli, that Roselli himself had hit Giancana. Which, I've had a couple of discussions with Guy, and I didn't really want to argue with him too much, but I made it quite clear that this is totally disputed by almost every other account of what happened to Giancana. Because the two leading suspects by far are his driver and bodyguard, Butch Blasi, and the gun was recovered not far from where Blasi lived in relation to Giancana's house. Alternatively, Tony Spilotro has been named as the most likely shooter of Giancana. But at any rate,
really?
No one really suggested that Roselli was still a hitman, if he ever was one, in his when he was like 70 years old. It's absolutely absurd, actually, if you think about it. That 70 years old, it's not totally absurd, but I don't think he was ever placed in Chicago at the time. And I just think it wouldn't, all these other people wouldn't be saying what they're saying about Blasi and Spilotro if there wasn't a lot of evidence for it and precious little evidence that Roselli would have done it.
Well, we just lost Frank Collada, so that one goes to his, that story goes to the grave with him.
Yeah, we did. I felt kind of sad about that.
It was a nice guy, believe it or not. Everybody knew him. Everybody in Vegas knew him. Everywhere. After my first interview, and the next day, we had a banquet with Victoria's basketball team, and one of the parents was an FBI agent, and she knew him. And then I did the sheriff's debate. I moderated the sheriff's debate, and everyone there knew me. Everybody knew him. So he knew everybody in Vegas. He's a fascinating character.
Yeah, he did. Now, have you had Tosh Plumlee on your show?
No, I haven't. No, and he seems a very the way he has to do an interview from his car on a phone or something like that at a certain time. You familiar with that situation?
No, I'm not.
Yeah, it's
but it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But anyway,
what's his involvement?
He claims to have seen Roselli in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 63, that Plumlee was part of an abort mission that was going to stop the plot, and that Roselli was performing the same function, but that somehow whatever they thought was going to go down, a fake plot or a plot that they would be able to stop, rather, they weren't able to stop it, and it went down as the assassins planned. And so that's one of the people that claims that Roselli was in Dealey Plaza. But there's more, because when Bill Bonanno's book came out called Bound by Honor, he related the story that he was in prison with Roselli, and that Roselli told him that, yes, he was in Dealey Plaza, and more than that, that he shot JFK from the storm drain.
I've heard that storm
It's
drain
believed
story
that Roselli
before.
was not even in. The best evidence I've heard suggests that, in fact, Roselli was in Las Vegas, and was woken up by news that Kennedy had been killed. To my knowledge, Roselli never implicated himself in the assassination, but he did tell those other things about the plots and about the so-called turnaround plot that backfired, that Fidel turned around against Kennedy. But he never implicated himself as being on the scene. Now, I was going to say, Tosh Plumlee, in the wake of the discovery of Roselli's body, he was one of those questioned by the FBI to see what he knew about it, whether he could help them in their investigation at all, which he couldn't. Now, they also questioned a lot of these anti-Castro Cubans that they knew Roselli knew, and that didn't really pan out. It is believed that Trafficante ordered the Roselli hit. Now, I've heard one possible name thrown out as the hitman, but someone else who's written 2 books on Trafficante claims that the guy that Sam Cagnina is not the guy on the boat who strangled Roselli. What else? Roselli was also a friend of a Washington lobbyist named Fred Black. Fred Black was involved with Bobby Baker, which is a scandal that would have brought down LBJ had Kennedy not been assassinated. And Bobby Baker was in bed with some of the Lansky associates, some of these same associates who were backing LBJ in his political career. LBJ was getting dirty money all around. And Fred Black was also questioned by the FBI in the wake of the Roselli killing. I find it also intriguing that it came out in New Times Magazine that Roselli and Jack Ruby met together in Miami 1 month before the assassination.
That's fascinating. I never heard that one before.
It also came up.
Hey, did you hear the show with Gary Hill? The show with Gary Hill?
Oh, yeah, that was excellent, I thought.
Yeah, and we're going to have him back.
He was really good.
Well, I had to rein him in because he was getting too much into the weeds. This guy's got an encyclopedia of knowledge. But the stuff he was talking about, how all the witnesses to the Tippit shooting were all people associated with the Jack Ruby.
Well, not all of them, but at least a handful of them were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, you almost get the impression, like, Ruby was calling around to people who saw him there that day and putting the fix in.
I mentioned some of that on a Lone Nutter group today. Or yesterday, rather.
Ted, it's funny because people will hear us talking about this stuff. And first we're talking about the JFK assassination, but then we're throwing names around like E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis. And they say, well, what do you mean? No, those are Watergate guys. But people don't realize that it's been like the same crew of guys that were going after Castro. They killed Che Guevara. And then even some of these guys later on were involved in Iran-Contra, these same type of characters. How is that?
And with the involvement in the drug trafficking, the Kerry investigation, the Christic Institute lawsuit, which didn't come to a very good end. They totally got blown out of the water in that. But no, you're right.
And even, I had on, like I said,
kept recurring.
Yeah, Frank Sturgis was involved in rigging the Billie Jean King Bobby Riggs tennis match so he could gamble on that. These guys are just into everything with impunity.
Where did it say that he was involved in that?
His nephew told me.
He did?
Yeah.
I read about some other organized crime people being involved in that, maybe Trafficante, but really? Sturgis himself?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I know, it's crazy. And Tosh Plumlee, he was involved in